The microphone feedback pierced through the ballroom as my daughter Emma lifted her champagne glass, her stepmother Linda beaming beside her in that powder blue dress I'd helped her pick out 3 months ago, back when I still thought I'd be sitting at the head table instead of watching from table 12 in the back corner where they'd seated me next to Emma's college roommate's parents who kept asking if I was the caterer. I just want to thank the most important woman in my life. Emma's voice carried across the reception hall that I'd booked 18 months ago, the same venue where I'd celebrated my own 25th wedding anniversary before David decided he needed someone 10 years younger with fewer opinions about his golf schedule. Linda, you've been more of a mother to me than anyone ever has, and I'm so grateful Dad found someone who actually knows how to love unconditionally. The words hit me like ice water in my chest, lodged there sharp and cold, while 300 guests turned to look at Linda, who dabbed at her eyes with the handkerchief I'd embroidered with her initials as a peace offering last Christmas, back when I still believed being gracious would somehow earn me a place in my own daughter's life. I watched Linda stand up and wave, accepting the applause like she'd earned it, like she'd been the one pacing hospital hallways during Emma's appendectomy at 14, like she'd been the one working double shifts to pay for dance lessons and tennis camp and that summer abroad program that Emma now credited with opening her eyes to what real family support looks like. I sat there in my navy dress, the one Emma had approved because it was understated enough not to draw attention away from the bride, and felt something shift inside me, some carefully maintained illusion finally cracking open to reveal what had been building underneath for 3 years now. The realization that my daughter, the child I'd carried for 9 months and raised for 24 years, mostly on my own while David traveled for work, genuinely believed that the woman who'd entered her life at age 21 was more of a mother than I'd ever been. But here's what Emma didn't know, what none of them knew as they clinked glasses and wiped away tears over Linda's maternal devotion. I own this venue. Had bought it 2 years ago when the previous owners were facing bankruptcy, saw it as both an investment property and a way to ensure Emma could have her dream wedding here without the 18-month waiting list. The same way I'd quietly purchased the catering company when I learned they were Emma's first choice but outside her budget. The same way I'd been the anonymous benefactor who'd covered the flowers, the photography, the band, the open bar, even the honeymoon to Tuscany that Emma kept posting about on social media with captions about how some people just know how to make dreams come true. I'd done it all through a network of shell companies and trusted attorneys, partly because I wanted to give Emma everything she'd ever dreamed of, and partly because I knew that if she realized her divorced, bitter mother was behind it all, she'd refuse it out of loyalty to Linda's narrative about how I was still hung up on the past and couldn't accept that David had found real happiness. It was easier to let them believe the generosity came from David's mysterious business success, easier to watch from the sidelines than risk Emma's rejection of anything that came from me directly. See, the thing about being systematically erased from your own child's life is that it happens so gradually you don't notice it at first. It starts with little things. Emma begins calling Linda for advice about her college classes instead of me, mentions Linda's opinions about her boyfriends during our monthly dinners, thanks Linda instead of me for the care packages I still send every exam season. Then it escalates to bigger omissions. I find out about Emma's engagement through Facebook, learn about the wedding date from a save-the-date card that arrives 3 weeks after everyone else got theirs, discover I'm not invited to the bridal shower because it's just going to be close family and Linda's taking care of everything. The bridal shower exclusion had been particularly devastating, though I'd hidden it well behind congratulatory smiles and understanding nods when Emma explained it to me over lunch at that little cafe where we used to go for mother-daughter dates when she was in high school. She'd stirred her latte with nervous energy, the same fidgeting she'd done as a child when she was about to ask for something she wasn't sure she deserved, and explained that Linda had already sent out invitations and planned the whole event around just the core family women and closest friends. "But Mom," Emma had said, reaching across the table to pat my hand in that condescending way that made me feel ancient. "You understand, right? Linda's put so much work into making it special, and it's going to be at her house anyway, so it just makes sense for her to handle the guest list. Besides, you hate those kinds of parties, all that squealing over lingerie and kitchen gadgets. This is more your style, just the two of us talking." What she meant, of course, was that this was more the style she'd decided suited me, the divorced mother who could be managed with occasional one-on-one lunches and kept at arm's length from the real celebrations. The woman who could be counted on to send appropriate gifts and make encouraging phone calls, but didn't need to be included in the actual joy of the moment. I'd smiled and agreed that I did prefer intimate conversations to big parties, even though some of my happiest memories from Emma's childhood were the elaborate birthday celebrations I'd organized single-handedly while David was traveling. Themed parties with handmade decorations and games I'd researched for weeks. Events that Emma had loved so much she'd still been talking about them years later when she started high school. But apparently those memories belonged to a version of me that no longer existed in her mind, replaced by this new narrative where I was the practical, unimaginative parent who handled logistics while someone else provided the emotional warmth. The transformation had been so complete that I'd started doubting my own memories. Had I really been the creative, involved mother I remembered, or was I romanticizing the past to make myself feel better about being displaced? It took me months of going through old photo albums and rereading cards Emma had made me over the years to convince myself that yes, I had been a devoted, hands-on parent who'd prioritized my daughter's happiness above almost everything else in my life. But by then, the rewriting of our history was so entrenched that bringing up contradictory evidence would have made me look desperate and pathetic. Emma had found a story that worked for her, one where her mother was well-meaning but limited, while her stepmother was everything she'd always needed, and challenging that narrative would only confirm her belief that I was bitter and unable to accept the new family dynamic. So instead, I'd thrown myself into providing support in the ways Emma would still accept. I'd researched wedding vendors obsessively, using my connections in the medical field to get referrals to the best professionals in the city. I'd quietly arranged financing for everything Emma mentioned wanting, creating elaborate paper trails that made it look like David's business had suddenly become incredibly profitable. I'd spent weekends touring venues with Emma and Linda, playing the role of helpful consultant while they made decisions about my daughter's wedding. The venue search had been particularly painful. Emma had fallen in love with Riverside Manor the moment we'd walked through the doors. The way the afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, the elegant ballroom with its crystal chandeliers, the gardens where she could take photos with her bridal party. But when she'd learned about the pricing and availability, her face had fallen in that specific way that took me right back to when she was 8 years old and realized we couldn't afford the American Girl doll she'd been wanting for months. "It's okay," she'd said, the same brave smile she'd worn as a child when she was trying to hide disappointment. "There are lots of other beautiful places. This one's probably too fancy anyway." But Linda had squeezed her hand and said, "Don't give up on your dream venue just yet, sweetheart. Sometimes things work out in ways we don't expect." I'd excused myself to go to the restroom and spent 20 minutes on the phone with my attorney, arranging to purchase Riverside Manor outright through one of my shell companies. By the time I'd returned to the tour group, I'd already ensured that Emma would be able to have her dream wedding here, even though she'd never know I was the one who'd made it possible. That pattern had repeated itself with every aspect of the wedding planning. Emma would mention wanting something that was outside their budget. Linda would encourage her to dream big and see what happens, and I would quietly arrange for that dream to become reality through anonymous gifts or mysterious business windfalls that David never questioned because they aligned with his own desire to look successful in front of his new wife and daughter. The catering had been the most complex arrangement. Emma had tasted Bella's cuisine at a friend's wedding and declared it absolutely perfect, exactly the kind of elevated comfort food she wanted for her reception. But when we'd met with the owner to discuss pricing, it had become clear that their services were well beyond what David could actually afford, even with the financial padding I'd been secretly providing. I'd watched Emma's face fall as she calculated numbers in her head, watched Linda try to be encouraging while clearly doing her own math about their limitations. That night, I'd called my financial advisor and arranged to purchase Bella's catering through another shell company, specifically so that Emma could have exactly the menu she wanted without having to compromise or accept help from her emotionally unavailable mother. The photography had required similar maneuvering. Emma had been following Elegant Events photography on social media for 2 years, collecting their images on Pinterest boards and dreaming about having that same romantic editorial style for her own wedding. When she'd learned their pricing, she'd tried to hide her disappointment behind practical comments about how photography isn't really that important anyway, and we can just ask everyone to take lots of pictures with their phones. But I'd seen how her face lit up when she looked at their portfolios, recognized the same expression she'd had as a child when she'd discovered something that made her truly happy. So I'd arranged to sponsor their services anonymously, creating a fake contest that Emma had supposedly won, complete with a convincing backstory about being selected from hundreds of applicants for having the most romantic engagement story. Each arrangement had required elaborate planning and careful coordination with my attorney to ensure that the paper trail never led back to me. I'd had to create multiple business entities, arrange complex financial transfers, and coordinate with vendors who thought they were dealing with various anonymous benefactors and business partnerships. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, but it was also the only way I could contribute to my daughter's happiness without risking her rejection. The most painful part was watching David take credit for generosity he hadn't provided. He'd started telling people at work about how he was paying for Emma's dream wedding, bragging about the exclusive venue and high-end vendors in ways that made it clear he believed his own stories about sudden business success. Linda had supported this narrative, praising David publicly for being such a devoted father who would spare no expense for his daughter's happiness. Meanwhile, I'd been working extra shifts at the hospital to maintain my own financial stability while secretly funding a $60,000 wedding that everyone believed was being paid for by my ex-husband. I'd been living on a strict budget, postponing my own retirement planning and skipping vacations to ensure that Emma could have everything she'd dreamed of, all while listening to her praise David and Linda for their incredible generosity and support. The final straw had come during the rehearsal dinner, when David had stood up to give a toast about how proud he was to be able to give Emma the wedding she deserved. He'd talked about working hard to provide for his family, about the satisfaction of seeing his investment in his daughter pay off in her happiness. He thanked Linda for helping him become a better father and for showing him what it meant to truly support someone you love. Emma had cried during that speech, had stood up to hug David and tell him he was the best father any girl could ask for. She'd thanked Linda for making their family complete and for showing her what real partnership looked like. She'd looked right past me, sitting at my assigned table with distant relatives who kept asking polite questions about my job and whether I was dating anyone. That night, lying in my hotel room and listening to the celebration continue in the bar downstairs, I'd finally admitted to myself what had been building for months. I was being systematically erased from my own daughter's life story, and my attempts to maintain connection through secret generosity were only enabling the process. Emma felt comfortable dismissing my contributions because she genuinely believed I wasn't making any. She could afford to see me as limited and uninvolved because someone else was getting credit for the practical support that had always been my primary way of showing love. By the time Emma lifted that champagne glass at her reception to thank Linda for being more of a mother than anyone ever has been, I'd already made my decision. I'd spent 3 years trying to love my daughter from the shadows, trying to be gracious about being replaced, trying to support her happiness, even when it came at the expense of my own dignity. But listening to 300 people applaud Linda for maternal devotion she'd never actually provided, watching my daughter publicly erase 24 years of single-handed dedication, I realized that my generosity had become enabling, and my silence had become complicity. Standing up and walking to the front of that ballroom was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but also the most necessary. I'd spent my entire adult life putting Emma's needs before my own, believing that maternal love meant accepting whatever role she assigned me, no matter how diminished. But watching her thank someone else for the love I'd been providing invisibly, I understood that I'd been doing us both a disservice. She couldn't learn to value my contributions if she didn't know they existed, and I couldn't maintain my self-respect while pretending that being systematically dismissed was acceptable. The walk to the front of that room felt endless, past tables full of people who'd spent the evening celebrating a wedding that existed entirely because of my financial sacrifice. I could feel their eyes on me, could hear the whispers starting as they wondered what the mother of the bride was doing, why I was interrupting the toasts, whether I was about to make some kind of scene. Emma's face went white when she saw me approaching the microphone. She probably thought I was about to deliver some bitter speech about ungrateful children, maybe break down crying about being excluded, perhaps make the kind of embarrassing emotional scene that would confirm everyone's belief that I was the difficult parent who couldn't handle her reduced role with grace. Instead, I took that microphone with steady hands and looked out at 300 faces with the same calm composure I used when delivering difficult news to families in the emergency room. The room gradually quieted as people realized something significant was happening, that this wasn't going to be a typical mother of the bride moment. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I said, my voice carrying easily across the silent ballroom. "I just wanted to share a few things about tonight that I think everyone should know." Emma started moving toward me, probably planning to physically take the microphone away before I could embarrass her further, but I continued speaking before she could reach me. The words came out clearly and calmly, each sentence deliberate and measured. "First, I want to thank the staff here at Riverside Manor for the absolutely beautiful job they've done tonight. As the owner of this venue, I'm so proud of how they've transformed this space for Emma's special day." You could have heard a pin drop in that ballroom. 300 faces staring at me in confusion while Emma stopped dead in her tracks, her mouth falling open as she realized what I'd just revealed. David's face went ashen as he started doing the math, probably remembering all the times he'd bragged about securing such an exclusive venue for his daughter's wedding. I also want to acknowledge Bella's Catering for the incredible meal we've all enjoyed tonight. I purchased this company 18 months ago specifically to ensure Emma could have the exact menu she dreamed of, and they've exceeded every expectation. The murmurs started then, people turning to each other with confused whispers, trying to process what they were hearing. Linda's face had gone from glowing pride to dawning horror as she began to understand the implications of my announcements. I could see her gripping David's arm, both of them looking like they were watching a car accident in slow motion. And of course, I have to mention Elegant Events Photography, Harmony String Quartet, and Premier Florals, all companies I've had the pleasure of working with extensively over the past 2 years to create tonight's celebration. Each of these businesses has been carefully selected and contracted to ensure Emma's wedding would be everything she dreamed of. Emma's mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out, like she couldn't quite form words around what she was hearing. The confidence she'd had while thanking Linda had completely evaporated, replaced by a growing understanding of what my words meant, of how drastically she'd misunderstood the situation she was in. The truth is, I continued, letting my voice carry the weight of 3 years of hidden sacrifice, when Emma told me 6 months ago that Linda would be handling the mother of the bride duties because she was better at party planning, I realized I needed to find another way to contribute to my daughter's happiness. So I did what mothers do. I made sure she had everything she wanted, even if she didn't want it to come from me. I paused, looking directly at Emma, whose face was now flushed with embarrassment and something that might have been shame. Around us, 300 guests sat in complete silence, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented, some kind of family reckoning that would be talked about for years to come. I've covered the cost of everything you've experienced tonight: the venue, the food, the flowers, the music, the photography, the open bar, even the honeymoon to Tuscany that you're so excited about. I did it anonymously because I knew you'd reject anything that came directly from your emotionally unavailable mother. The silence was deafening now. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, frozen in place as they watched this family drama unfold. I could see Linda whispering urgently to David, both of them clearly trying to figure out how to salvage a situation that was spiraling completely out of their control. But listening to you thank Linda for being more of a mother than anyone ever has been, I realized I've been doing us both a disservice. You clearly don't want or need my maternal support, and I've been foolish to keep providing it secretly, so I want to announce that as of right now, I'm officially stepping back from that role. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, opening the banking app I'd prepared for this exact moment if it ever came to this. My fingers were steady as I navigated to the accounts I'd set up specifically for Emma's wedding expenses. I'm canceling the payment for your honeymoon, I said, tapping the screen with deliberate precision. Tuscany is beautiful this time of year, but I'm sure Linda can arrange something equally lovely within her budget. Another tap. The catering balance is being transferred back to my account. That's approximately $18,000 that Bella's was expecting tomorrow. Emma finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Mom, what are you can't. This is my wedding. I absolutely can, I said, my voice remaining calm and measured. These are my businesses, my contracts, my financial obligations, and since Linda is apparently your real mother now, I'm sure she'll be happy to take over these responsibilities like any devoted parent would. I turned to look directly at Linda, who was now gripping David's arm so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Linda, honey, the outstanding balance for tonight is approximately $47,000. The photography contract has a remaining balance of $8,000. The string quartet still needs to be paid their performance fee of $3,000. The floral arrangements were $12,000, and there's a $5,000 cleanup and service fee for the venue. David's face had gone from ashen to green as I detailed the numbers. I could see him doing rapid mental calculations, probably realizing for the first time exactly how far beyond their means they'd been living. His salary was comfortable but not extravagant, and Linda's boutique income wasn't going to cover a $75,000 wedding bill. The honeymoon package was another $12,000, I continued, still scrolling through my banking app. That includes the villa rental, flights, meals, and activities. I've just canceled all of those reservations, so you'll need to make new arrangements if you still want to take a trip. Emma was crying now, not the happy tears she'd been shedding during her toast to Linda, but the desperate, panicked tears of someone watching their perfect day collapse around them. You can't do this, she said, her voice breaking. This is my wedding day. You can't ruin my wedding day over some stupid toast. Sweetheart, I said, and my voice was gentle now, the way it used to be when she was small and needed comfort after a nightmare. I'm not ruining anything. I'm just stopping pretending that my contributions don't matter. You wanted Linda to be your mother. Let her be your mother completely. Let her handle the bills, the responsibilities, the unglamorous parts of caring for you that I've been covering all these years while she got credit for the fun parts. I looked around the room at all these people who'd spent the evening celebrating what they thought was David's generosity and Linda's maternal devotion. You see, everyone here tonight has been enjoying a party that was funded entirely by the woman Emma just described as less of a mother than her stepmother. The woman who supposedly doesn't know how to love unconditionally has been loving unconditionally enough to spend her retirement savings on a wedding for a daughter who publicly dismisses her contributions. The murmurs were getting louder now, people starting to understand the full scope of what they were witnessing. I could see Emma's friends looking shocked, David's relatives whispering among themselves, Linda's family members staring at her with new understanding of how precarious her position actually was. But the most important thing I want everyone to understand, I said, raising my voice to carry over the growing noise, is that this isn't about money. This is about respect. This is about a daughter who spent 3 years systematically erasing her mother's contributions to her life while giving credit to someone who showed up after all the hard work was done. I handed the microphone back to the DJ and started walking toward the exit, but Emma caught my arm before I could leave the room. "Please," she whispered, desperation clear in her voice. "Please don't do this. I'm sorry about what I said. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Please don't ruin everything." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was 24 years old, beautiful and successful and surrounded by people who loved her, but in that moment she looked like a terrified child who'd just realized she'd made a terrible mistake. "Emma," I said softly, "I'm not ruining everything. I'm just refusing to be invisible anymore. You have a choice to make now. You can figure out how to appreciate the mother you actually have, or you can learn what it's like to truly not have my support, but you can't continue treating me like I'm replaceable while depending on me to be irreplaceable." I walked out of that ballroom and didn't look back, past tables full of stunned guests, past Emma's college friends who were openly staring, past my own relatives who looked mortified and proud in equal measure. Behind me, I could hear Emma starting to sob, David's voice raised in panic as he tried to figure out how to salvage the situation, Linda's higher-pitched protests that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I kept expecting to feel guilty, to regret the public nature of what I'd just done, to wish I'd handled it differently. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years, complete, perfect clarity about my own worth and my willingness to accept being treated as less than I deserved. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 6:30 a.m. Emma, hysterical and barely coherent, demanding to know how I could have humiliated her like that in front of everyone she cared about. David, alternating between rage and desperate pleading, trying to negotiate some kind of payment plan that wouldn't bankrupt them. Linda, crying and insisting that she'd never meant to replace me, that she'd always respected my role as Emma's mother. I listened to each voicemail exactly once, then deleted them. By 10 a.m., I'd received texts from multiple family members who'd been at the wedding, all saying essentially the same thing. It's about time. By noon, my assistant had sent detailed invoices to David and Linda for all outstanding wedding expenses, with payment terms that were generous but non-negotiable. The photography company kept the photos they'd taken during the ceremony, but didn't provide the edited wedding album Emma had been expecting. The string quartet sent a bill for their contracted performance fee. The florist demanded payment for the arrangements that were already wilting in the reception hall. Every vendor I'd been secretly paying through shell companies suddenly became a very real financial obligation for David and Linda to handle. Emma's honeymoon to Tuscany was canceled, of course. The villa rental, the cooking classes, the wine tours, the romantic dinners, all of it disappeared when I revoked the payments. Emma and her new husband spent their first week of marriage dealing with vendor calls and payment demands instead of sipping wine in Italian vineyards and posting romantic photos on social media. I felt no guilt about any of it. Not the financial consequences, not the embarrassment, not the fact that Emma's perfect wedding day had ended with her sobbing in a bathroom stall while Linda tried frantically to figure out how to cover bills that were larger than most people's annual salary. 2 weeks after the wedding, I received a call from David's brother Tom, who'd been at the reception and witnessed the entire confrontation. "Margaret," he said, and I could hear both admiration and concern in his voice. "I've been thinking about what happened at the wedding, and I have to say, I'm impressed. I had no idea you'd been supporting Emma so extensively, and frankly, the way she talked about you in that toast was completely out of line." "Thank you for saying that," I replied, genuinely grateful to hear from someone who understood what I'd been dealing with. But I'm also worried, Tom continued. David called me last night, and he's in complete panic mode about these bills. He's talking about taking out a second mortgage, maybe selling his car. Linda's apparently been crying for 2 weeks straight. I know Emma hurt you, but this is going to destroy them financially. I'd been expecting this call, had been wondering how long it would take for someone in David's family to try to mediate the situation. Tom was a good man, had always treated me fairly during the divorce, and I respected his concern for his brother's welfare. Tom, I said carefully, I understand that the financial consequences are severe, but I want you to understand something. I spent 3 years providing anonymous support while watching my daughter publicly dismiss my value as a mother. I funded her entire adult lifestyle while she credited other people for opportunities I made possible. At what point was someone going to be concerned about the toll that was taking on me? There was a long pause before Tom responded. You're right, he said finally. We all saw what was happening and none of us said anything because it seemed like you were handling it with such grace. But maybe we should have spoken up when Emma started treating you like you didn't matter. Maybe, I agreed. But it's not your responsibility to manage my relationship with my daughter. It's Emma's responsibility to learn how to value the people who love her, and it's my responsibility to stop enabling behavior that hurts me. Tom was quiet for another moment. Is there any way to work this out? Some kind of compromise that doesn't completely bankrupt David and Linda, but still makes your point? I'd been thinking about this question for days, trying to figure out what resolution would actually serve everyone's best interests. The truth was, I didn't want to destroy David and Linda financially. I just wanted them to understand the reality of what they'd been taking for granted. Here's what I'm willing to do, I said. I'll reinstate the honeymoon payments if Emma calls me personally and has a real conversation about what happened. Not an apology for the toast, an actual conversation about why she's been treating me the way she has and what she wants our relationship to look like going forward. And the other bills? I'll work out payment plans with David and Linda that won't bankrupt them, but they need to take full responsibility for the debts. No more pretending that David paid for everything, no more taking credit for generosity they didn't provide. If they want to be Emma's primary parental figures, they need to actually handle the responsibilities that come with that role. Tom agreed to relay my terms to David, and within hours I received a call from Emma. She was calmer than she'd been in her previous voicemails, but I could hear the strain in her voice as she tried to figure out how to navigate this conversation. Mom, she said, and just hearing her use that word instead of my first name was a small step forward. I need to understand what happened. I mean, I know what you said at the wedding, but I need to understand why you did it that way. Emma, I replied, how long do you think I should have continued funding your life while listening to you publicly credit other people for my generosity? There was a long silence before she answered. I didn't know you were funding anything. I thought Dad was paying for the wedding. But even if David had been paying, why would that make Linda more of a mother to you than I've been? What has she done to earn that designation that I haven't done for 24 years? Another pause. She makes me feel like I don't have to earn her love. Like I can just be myself and she'll support me no matter what. And you think I haven't supported you no matter what? You think my love has been conditional somehow? Not conditional, Emma said slowly, but complicated. With you, I always felt like I had to live up to everything you'd sacrificed for me. With Linda, I could just be grateful without feeling guilty. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't even realized I'd been holding tightly. Emma, I never wanted you to feel guilty about my choices. I made those sacrifices because I wanted to be your mother, not because I expected you to spend your life owing me for them. But you were always so capable, so independent, she continued. It felt like you didn't need anything from me, like you had everything under control. Linda seems more vulnerable, I guess. Like she needs me as much as I need her. And you preferred that dynamic? I guess I did, Emma admitted. It felt more equal somehow, more like a real relationship instead of just me being grateful all the time. We talked for 2 hours that afternoon, really talked for the first time since she'd left for college and started building her independent adult life. She told me about feeling caught between loyalty to me and gratitude to Linda, about how David had encouraged her to see their divorce as evidence of my inability to maintain relationships, about how she'd convinced herself that rejecting me was the same thing as choosing happiness. I told her about the loneliness of being systematically replaced, about the financial sacrifices I'd made to support her dreams while she was crediting someone else with her opportunities, about the quiet heartbreak of loving someone who seemed determined to prove that your love wasn't good enough or necessary. I never wanted to prove your love wasn't good enough, Emma said, her voice thick with tears. I just wanted to feel like I had choices, like I wasn't trapped in gratitude forever. But Emma, I said gently, gratitude doesn't have to be a trap. It can be a foundation for a different kind of relationship, one where we acknowledge what we've meant to each other instead of pretending it doesn't matter. By the time we hung up, we'd established some new boundaries and expectations. I would no longer provide financial support anonymously. If she needed help, she'd have to ask directly and accept that it was coming from me. She would stop comparing me to Linda and start acknowledging the different but equally valuable roles we'd both played in her life. Most importantly, she would never again publicly diminish my contributions to her life, whether I was present to hear it or not. The honeymoon to Tuscany was reinstated, though Emma and her husband had to delay it by 6 weeks while they sorted through the emotional aftermath of the wedding confrontation. The other wedding bills were restructured into payment plans that David and Linda could manage without going bankrupt, but they had to acknowledge publicly that they hadn't actually paid for the wedding themselves. Linda and I eventually had our own conversation, one that was surprisingly productive once we got past her initial defensiveness about being blamed for Emma's behavior. She admitted that she'd enjoyed being seen as the better mother figure, but insisted she'd never actively encouraged Emma to diminish me. I think I was flattered by how much she seemed to prefer me, Linda said during our awkward coffee meeting a month after the wedding. It made me feel special, like I was really contributing something valuable to her life. I didn't think about how that might be affecting you. Linda, I said, you were contributing something valuable. Emma does need different types of support from different people, but when that support comes at the expense of erasing someone else's contributions, it becomes destructive instead of helpful. We worked out an arrangement where Linda would continue to be an important figure in Emma's life, but she would also actively acknowledge my role as Emma's mother instead of allowing herself to be positioned as my replacement. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was honest in ways that our previous dynamic hadn't been. The most significant change was in Emma herself. Slowly, carefully, she began acknowledging the reality of who had actually been present for what throughout her life. She stopped describing her childhood as difficult and started recognizing it as stable despite the challenges. She began crediting me for the sacrifices that had made her opportunities possible, not as a burden she owed me for, but as evidence of a love she'd temporarily lost sight of. It took 8 months for our relationship to find its new equilibrium. Emma had to learn how to appreciate practical support instead of just emotional nurturing, and I had to learn how to accept that she would always love Linda differently than she loved me without that diminishing the unique value of our mother-daughter bond. The wedding that was supposed to celebrate Emma replacing me with Linda ended up being the beginning of Emma learning to value us both appropriately. The public confrontation that everyone expected would destroy our family actually forced us to have the honest conversations we'd been avoiding for 3 years. David and Linda's marriage survived the financial strain, though it took them 2 years to pay off all the wedding expenses, and their relationship with money became much more realistic. David stopped taking credit for generosity he hadn't provided, and Linda learned to appreciate being a bonus mother without needing to be seen as the primary mother. These days, Emma calls me every Sunday, not because she has to, but because she wants to. She asks my advice about important decisions and actually listens to my responses. When she thanks Linda for something publicly, she makes sure to acknowledge my contributions as well. She's learned that love isn't a competition and that honoring one person doesn't require diminishing another. The change in her perspective became most clear about a year after the wedding, when she was dealing with a difficult situation at work and called me instead of Linda for guidance. Her supervisor had been taking credit for projects Emma had completed, and she was struggling with how to address it without seeming confrontational or ungrateful for her job. "It's so frustrating, Mom," she said during that phone call, and I could hear the genuine distress in her voice. "I put in all this extra work, stay late to make sure everything's perfect, and then she presents it to the department head like it was her idea, but I don't want to seem like I'm being petty or can't handle criticism." As she described the situation, I could hear echoes of what had happened between us, the way Emma had been taking credit for opportunities I'd provided while I stayed silent to avoid seeming bitter or demanding. But instead of pointing out the parallel directly, I focused on helping her think through her options. "Emma," I said, "what do you think would happen if you just stopped doing the extra work and let her handle the projects entirely on her own?" There was a pause while she considered this. I guess. I guess she'd probably fail pretty spectacularly. She doesn't actually know how to do most of the technical parts. And how would that serve your goals at work? It wouldn't, Emma admitted. I'd still be stuck in the same position, and the department would suffer because the work wouldn't get done properly. So what's a better approach? We spent an hour working through strategies for documenting her contributions, building alliances with colleagues, and having direct conversations with her supervisor about recognition and advancement. But the most important part of the conversation came at the end, when Emma said something that showed me how much her understanding had evolved. Mom, I think I'm finally understanding what happened at my wedding. Not just the money part, but the whole situation. I was basically doing to you what my supervisor is doing to me, taking credit for work I didn't do while the person who actually did it had to watch from the sidelines. That's a very mature way to look at it, I replied, genuinely proud of her ability to make that connection. I keep thinking about how I felt when my supervisor presented my project as her own idea, and then I multiply that by 24 years, and I can't believe I did that to you. I can't believe I stood up in front of 300 people and basically said that someone else was a better mother than you when you were literally paying for the party where I said it. Her voice broke a little at the end, and I could tell this realization was genuinely painful for her to process. Emma, what matters is that you understand it now. What matters is that you're willing to do things differently going forward. But how do I make up for it? How do I fix something like that? It was a question she'd asked me several times over the past year, always with this desperate edge, like she thought there must be some grand gesture that could undo the hurt she'd caused. But I'd learned that the real repair wasn't going to come from dramatic apologies or expensive gifts. It was going to come from sustained changes in how she treated me and talked about our relationship. You don't fix it all at once, Bo, I told her. You fix it by calling me for advice when you need guidance. You fix it by including me in important moments instead of treating me like an obligation. You fix it by acknowledging my contributions to your life instead of pretending they don't exist. You fix it by treating me like your mother instead of like some distant relative you have to be polite to. That conversation marked a turning point in our relationship. Emma started actively seeking my input on major decisions, her career moves, her marriage challenges, even her friendships. She began inviting me to events without being prompted, making sure I knew I was wanted rather than just tolerated. Most importantly, she started talking about me publicly in ways that reflected the reality of our relationship, rather than the diminished version she'd been promoting. The change was most evident during Emma's second wedding anniversary, when she posted a long social media tribute that mentioned both Linda and me specifically. 2 years ago, I married my best friend in the wedding of my dreams, she wrote. I'm so grateful for all the people who made that day possible. My dad for walking me down the aisle, Linda for helping me stay calm and having fun with all the details, and my mom for literally everything else. Mom, I know I didn't handle things well back then, but I hope you know how much your love and support have meant to me throughout my entire life. Thank you for never giving up on us, even when I gave you every reason to. Reading that post, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Emma was a child. Genuine pride in who she was becoming, not just as my daughter, but as a person who was learning to acknowledge the complexity of love and family relationships. The woman who wrote those words was someone who had grown beyond the simplistic narrative she'd embraced in her early 20s, someone who could hold space for multiple relationships without needing to rank them or diminish one to elevate another. Linda had liked and commented on the post, adding her own message about how grateful she was to be part of Emma's extended family and how much she respected the foundation I'd provided for Emma's life. It was a small gesture, but it represented the kind of mutual recognition that had been completely absent from our dynamic during those difficult 3 years. The financial consequences of the wedding confrontation lasted much longer than the emotional ones. David and Linda had to take out a substantial loan to cover the vendor payments, which meant cutting back significantly on their lifestyle and postponing plans for home renovations and vacations. Emma and her husband ended up contributing to the payments as well, using money they'd been saving for a house, down payment to help cover the catering and photography bills. But rather than creating lasting resentment, the financial strain seemed to give everyone a more realistic understanding of what wedding expenses actually look like and what it means to take responsibility for major life celebrations. David stopped bragging about providing for Emma's wedding and started being more honest about his financial limitations. Linda developed a new appreciation for the kind of behind-the-scenes financial planning that makes big dreams possible. Emma later told me that having to pay for part of her own wedding had actually made her appreciate it more, not less. When I thought Dad had just written a check for everything, it felt like this magical gift that appeared out of nowhere, she said. But when I had to work extra hours and save money to help pay the bills, I understood how much sacrifice actually went into making it happen. It made me realize that your kind of love, the kind that involves real work and planning and giving up things for yourself, might be less fun than Linda's kind of love, but it's also more substantial. This understanding extended to other areas of our relationship as well. Emma began recognizing the practical ways I'd supported her throughout her life, not just the big gestures like secretly funding her wedding, but the smaller, consistent acts of care that had shaped her daily experience. She started acknowledging the extra shifts I'd worked to pay for her extracurricular activities, the vacations I'd skipped to fund her study abroad program, the ways I'd prioritized her needs when making decisions about my own career and social life. I think I used to see all that sacrifice as evidence that you were stressed and unhappy, Emma told me during one of our Sunday phone calls. It made me feel guilty, so I decided it was better to focus on people who seemed happier and more carefree. But now I realize that your willingness to make those sacrifices was actually evidence of how much you loved me, not evidence that something was wrong with our relationship. The transformation in Emma's perspective had ripple effects throughout our extended family as well. Her cousins and aunts who had witnessed the wedding confrontation and its aftermath began treating me with a new level of respect and recognition. Several of them reached out to share their own stories about feeling undervalued in family dynamics, thanking me for showing them that it was possible to stand up for yourself without destroying relationships entirely. My sister Carol, who had been at the wedding and watched the whole confrontation unfold, called me a few months later to tell me how the experience had affected her own family dynamics. Watching you refuse to be invisible made me realize I'd been letting my own kids take me for granted in similar ways, she said. Not to the same extent, but there were definitely patterns where I was doing all the work and other people were getting all the credit. I started speaking up about it, and surprisingly they responded really well. I think they just hadn't been paying attention to the imbalance. The most unexpected consequence of the wedding confrontation was how it affected my dating life. I'd been single since my divorce from David, partly by choice and partly because I'd been so focused on maintaining my relationship with Emma that I hadn't had much energy left for building new romantic connections. But standing up for myself so publicly, refusing to accept being diminished, seemed to shift something in how I saw myself and how others saw me. About 18 months after the wedding, I met Robert at a hospital fundraising event. He was a recently retired attorney who had been volunteering with the legal aid clinic, and we struck up a conversation about healthcare policy that lasted through the entire cocktail reception. He was intelligent, kind, and completely unimpressed by attempts to manipulate or diminish him, qualities I found incredibly attractive after years of watching David and Linda navigate their relationship through elaborate performances rather than honest communication. When I eventually told Robert about the wedding situation, his response was immediate and supportive. "You own businesses, Ottawa," he said, genuinely impressed. "And you managed to fund your daughter's entire wedding while maintaining complete anonymity? That's incredible strategic thinking. I can't believe she didn't appreciate having someone so competent and generous in her corner." It was refreshing to be with someone who saw my capabilities as assets rather than threats, who appreciated my independence rather than being intimidated by it. Robert had been married for 32 years before his wife passed away from cancer, and he understood the difference between supporting someone and enabling them, between being generous and being taken advantage of. Emma's reaction to my relationship with Robert was another indicator of how much she'd grown. Instead of feeling threatened by my happiness or worried about being replaced in my affections, she seemed genuinely excited that I was building a life that included joy and companionship rather than just duty and sacrifice. "I'm so glad you found someone who appreciates you properly," she said when I first told her about Robert. "You deserve to be with someone who sees how amazing you are, instead of someone who takes you for granted." The contrast with her initial reaction to David and Linda's relationship was stark. When David had first started dating Linda, Emma had been enthusiastic about their romance, partly because it seemed to confirm that I was the problem in my marriage, that David just needed someone more compatible to be happy. But her response to my relationship with Robert showed that she now understood the difference between someone who brought out the best in me and someone who had made me feel like I needed to diminish myself to maintain peace. 2 years after the wedding, Emma asked if Robert and I would be willing to host Thanksgiving dinner at my house. It was a small request, but it represented a significant shift in family dynamics. Emma was actively choosing to create traditions that centered me, rather than automatically defaulting to celebrations organized by David and Linda. That Thanksgiving was one of the most satisfying days I'd experienced in years. Emma and her husband arrived early to help with cooking, bringing flowers and wine and genuine enthusiasm for the meal I'd planned. David and Linda came as invited guests rather than assumed hosts, contributing side dishes and expressing gratitude for the work I'd put into the celebration. Robert fit seamlessly into the group, engaging everyone in conversation and making it clear that he was proud to be part of my family gatherings. But the moment that meant the most to me came when Emma stood up before we ate to share what she was grateful for. "I'm thankful for this beautiful meal and for Mom opening her home to all of us," she said, looking directly at me. "I'm grateful for all the ways you've supported and loved me, especially during the times when I wasn't mature enough to appreciate it properly, and I'm thankful that we figured out how to have an honest relationship where we can all be ourselves without anyone having to be invisible." Linda nodded in agreement and added, "I'm grateful to be part of a family where we've learned to appreciate each other's different contributions instead of competing over who matters most." Even David, who had been somewhat awkward around me since the wedding confrontation, managed to say, "Margaret, thank you for creating such a welcoming celebration, and thank you for helping all of us learn to be more honest about what we owe each other." Sitting at that table, surrounded by people who had learned to see me clearly rather than through the diminished lens I'd been allowing them to use for years, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with being right and everything to do with being genuinely valued. The wedding confrontation that had seemed so dramatic and destructive in the moment had actually been the catalyst for building more authentic relationships throughout my family. By refusing to remain invisible, I'd forced everyone to acknowledge realities they'd been comfortable ignoring. By setting boundaries around how I was willing to be treated, I'd created space for more honest and appreciative dynamics. Emma's marriage has thrived in ways that might not have been possible if she'd continued operating from her previous assumptions about love and family loyalty. Learning to appreciate practical support and sustained commitment rather than just emotional excitement has made her a better partner to her husband and a more grounded person overall. She's applied the lessons from our relationship to other areas of her life, becoming someone who notices and acknowledges the behind-the-scenes work that makes her opportunities possible. Linda has grown into her role as a bonus family member without needing to diminish anyone else's contributions. She's found ways to be special to Emma that don't require erasing my importance, and she's developed genuine respect for the different but equally valuable type of support I provide. Our relationship isn't warm exactly, but it's honest and functional in ways that serve everyone better than the previous dynamic of polite competition. David has had to confront some uncomfortable truths about his tendency to take credit for things he didn't actually provide, both in our marriage and in his relationship with Emma. He's become more realistic about his financial limitations and more honest about acknowledging other people's contributions to family successes. He's also developed a better understanding of what it actually costs, both financially and emotionally, to be the practical parent rather than just the fun parent. As for me, I've learned that setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's necessary for maintaining relationships that actually work for everyone involved. I've learned that you can love someone completely while still refusing to accept being devalued by them. Most importantly, I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for an ungrateful child is to stop enabling their ingratitude and force them to confront the reality of what they've been taking for granted. The woman who stood up at that wedding reception and announced her ownership of the businesses that had made the celebration possible was someone who had finally learned to value herself appropriately. The mother who walked out of that ballroom while her daughter sobbed over the consequences of her actions was someone who understood that love without self-respect ultimately serves no one well. 3 years later, I can honestly say that the wedding that was supposed to celebrate Emma replacing me with Linda ended up being the beginning of Emma learning to appreciate us both appropriately. The public confrontation that everyone expected would destroy our family actually forced us to build something more honest and sustainable. And while I wouldn't recommend my specific methods to everyone facing similar situations, I've never regretted standing up for my own worth that night, even though it meant temporarily destroying the illusion of family harmony that had been built on my invisible sacrifices. Sometimes love requires you to stop being invisible, even when the people you love have grown comfortable with your transparency. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to realize what they almost lost before it's actually gone forever. And sometimes the most important thing you can teach your child is that every relationship, even the one with their mother, requires mutual respect to truly thrive. The wedding was just the beginning of that lesson, but it was the beginning Emma needed to become the woman she was capable of being. Someone who could love multiple people without needing to diminish any of them. Someone who could appreciate sacrifice without feeling guilty about it. Someone who understood that the most reliable love often comes wrapped in practical support rather than just emotional celebration. That's the daughter I always knew she could be, and that's the relationship I was willing to fight for, even when fighting meant walking away from everything I'd built in the shadows and demanding to be seen in the light.